Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.
Anyway, today is, as you know, Yom HaZikaron, and although some people say it's Israeli holiday, whatever it is, but as I mentioned yesterday, we do have to think about the people who gave their lives for the defense of Eretz Yisrael and the Jewish people. And therefore, when we learn today, we should learn that should also be Le'ilui Nishmatam, for the elevation of their souls. And Hakaras Hatov is such an important principle of Judaism that it's the very definition of the word Jew. It's very, very interesting. You know, in the American Heritage Dictionary, I don't know if they took it out or not, but they have a section on slang. And apparently, in the South, the word Jew is used as a verb to cheat somebody in business, like, don't Jew around with me. So they took Jew as a verb, and they said, you know, don't do this. So people were protesting because they said, oh, it's anti-Semitic. But the truth is, a dictionary is a dictionary. They're giving you slang usage. So if I'm in Alabama and somebody says, don't Jew around with me, I would like to know what it meant. So the dictionary tells me. So you cannot complain about the dictionary, per se. But what's interesting is that if Jew has any verbal meaning at all, it actually means to be grateful. Because we are all called Yehudim, and that is after Leah's fourth child, Yehuda. And Yehuda was called Yehuda because Leah said, Hapam Eides Hashem. Now I am grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what Yehuda means, to be grateful. Now Rashi explains, why was Leah grateful, B'dafka, with the fourth son? So Rashi says, because she knew with Ruach HaKodesh that there would be 12 tribes, and she knew there are 4 women from whom the 12 tribes will come, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. So 12 divided by 4 is 3. So she figured each one of us is entitled to 3 children. So when you get something you think you're entitled to, you're not grateful. It's coming to you. But when she had number 4, she wound up having 6. But when she had number 4, she said, Natalti yeser al chelki. I have gotten more than my entitlement. That generates gratitude. When a person thinks they've gotten more than they're entitled to, they're makar tov. So says the Svas Emes, every single Jew is called a Yehudi because we have to go through life with the sense that Hashem has given me more brachos than I deserve. So even if there are hardships in life and I think I didn't get everything I would want to have, but whatever it is I have, I should feel that Hashem has given me more than I deserve. So this is a big yesod, the very definition of a Jew, the definition that is built into the name Jew is gratitude, right? And therefore that is the yesodistic idea of Hakaras Hatov, which ultimately is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it also applies to the human beings who have done things for us. Now people sometimes raise the question, it's an interesting question, we have to be Hakaras Hatov for someone who does me a taiva. What about people who get paid, right? Is there Hakaras Hatov, to the garbage collector? Is there Hakaras Hatov to the workers in a makolet? Some people say, well, why am I supposed to be grateful? They get paid for their job. But the truth is that doesn't take it away. If l'maisa I benefit from what somebody does, I have to feel gratitude, even if it's their job, even if they're getting paid for it, even if their motivation is not for me. They're not doing it for me. But there's still an idea of Hakaras Hatov. A little bit of a raya from this, maybe it's not 100% raya, is, the Shabbos that we read, Parshas B'Shalach, before Purim, is called Shabbat Shira, the Shabbos of song, because in Parshas B'Shalach is Oz Yosher, it's called Shabbat Shira. But there's an interesting minhag that is brought down for Shabbat Shira, that you feed the birds on that Shabbos. You put out breadcrumbs for the birds. I should have talked about it then. Now, l'maisa, halachically, that is actually a controversial minhag, because the Mishnah says in Masechah Shabbos that you're not supposed to put out food for animals that are wild animals that can fend for themselves. Unlike a pet, unlike your dog or cat, because that's called a tircha, that's called an unnecessary tircha. So according to that, you shouldn't be allowed to put out food, at least on Shabbos, for wild birds that fly around. The Aruch HaShulchan says, Eino Chinami, but you're allowed to shake out your tablecloth. In other words, you're not putting crumbs in a bird feeder, but you're shaking it out so the birds would get it. All right, so be it as it may. There is such a minhag. Yeah.
So, I'm just curious about that, because if you had seeds on like some of your like bread or something, could that be considered planting? If you
Well, that might be so. That might be so. But we're talking about breadcrumbs. So breadcrumbs. I mean the seeds on the challah. You mean like the poppy seed? That might be an issue. So maybe you should be machmer to use bread that's without seeds in it. The bread itself is not going to germinate. Bread itself, baked bread, is not going to. But your issue is about the seeds. That may be a possibility, indeed. So what's the reason why we put bread out on Shabbat Shira? So it's brought down because Parshas, it's nothing to do with Shira. The Parshas B'Shalach is also the Parsha of the man falling. Right, that's where the Parshas Haman. And Hashem told Bnei Yisrael, or told Moshe to tell Bnei Yisrael, that the man is going to fall on 6 days, and on the 6th day there'll be a double portion, and the man is not going to fall on Shabbos, right? And don't go out and look for the man will not fall on Shabbos. So you'll recall that Dathan and Aviram, the perennial troublemakers who eventually died with Korach, they wanted to discredit Moshe Rabbeinu. So they took some of their Shabbos man that God gave them on Friday, and they scattered it at night. They scattered it outside people's houses, so they would wake up and see the man, and they would say, oh, Moshe Rabbeinu was a liar, right? This is what Dathan and Aviram wanted to do. And what happened was the birds came and ate the man. So the next morning, when the Jewish people came out and Dathan and Aviram wanted to show them, here's the man, there was no man. So the birds saved the day. The birds prevented Moshe Rabbeinu from being discredited. So to show Hakaras Hatov to the birds, on that parsha of the man, we give them this extra food. So l'chayra, one might say, I don't know if it's a raya, l'chayra, did the birds eat the man for that purpose? Meaning to say, they may have ate the man because they wanted to eat the man. Meaning they didn't do it for this reason. Although maybe they did, you don't know. But if you understand that the birds ate the man as a natural phenomenon, then it turns out you still have to be makir tov, even if someone is doing the chesed. In fact, you see 3 points about hakaras hatov from the birds. Number one, first of all, you see, you have to have hakaras hatov not just to people, but even to animals. In fact, there's another chazal that you see you have to have hakaras hatov even to the inanimate. Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu was not allowed for the plague of blood and frogs. Moshe Rabbeinu was not allowed to hit the water. Aaron had to do it, because since the water had saved Moshe, he had to be makar tov to the water. And huadin to the birds. So that's one thing. It's not just people. The second thing you see is intergenerational, because obviously the birds alive today are not the birds that ate the man. So why do I have to show hakaras hatov to a bird today if that's not the bird that ate the man? The answer is intergenerational. In fact, you find this by kama v'kama b'gedalim, that if somebody's great-grandfather did a chesed for them, 50, 60 years before, the gadol would show tremendous hakaras hatov to the great-grandson. Many stories, Chavis Chaim, really, all gedalim, you see such a hanhaga. And the third point, which I think is not mukhrach, is perhaps you also see that even if the intention of the chesed was not to do a chesed for me, like the birds ate the man because they ate the man, motivation doesn't make a difference. If lamaisa I benefited, of course that raises the interesting question. On one hand, benefit without intention, there's hakaras hatov. What about intention without benefit? Which actually may be a common situation. What if somebody really intended to do a chesed for me, but they messed up? Right? They messed up. Do I have to be grateful for, their motivation? Or let's say they wanted to do a chesed for me and it was something I really didn't want, which sometimes happens. Right? Somebody wants to do a great favor for me and it's like the last thing I want, but they really thought they were giving me something good. So that's hard to have hakaras hatov actually, because you're not benefiting. You may even hate what they got you. Right? Somebody got you for a birthday gift that you absolutely despise. Okay? How do I feel grateful? So there you have to remember the other chazal, another chazal, that a machshava tova, a good thought, HaKadosh Baruch Hu counts like a good action, and therefore the person's machshava tova is something which generates Hakaras Hatov. So it turns out Hakaras Hatov can be based on good thought, even with bad action, or, like the birds, it can be based on good action, even with not a direct positive thought. Either one of them are Machayef Hakaras Hatov. So, be it as it may, the connection to today is that on a day like Yom HaZikaron, we should think about Hakaras Hatov that we have to the people that defended Eretz Yisrael and protected Am Yisrael. People sometimes say, well, you don't need protection. If everybody would learn Torah, we would be protected. Well, Lamaisa, you see that's not the case. You see Avada Torah is what brings Siyata D'Shmaya into the world. No question about that. But you see throughout Tanakh, the Jewish people needed an army. They needed an army in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu in the Midbar. They needed an army in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. They needed an army in the days of Yoshua, days of David HaMelech. Right? So you can't make the argument, oh, who needs the army? You know, the Torah itself is going to protect us. The whole story of the Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesuvim is that that's not the case, that we live in a world where Hishtadlus is required, and this Hishtadlus was required even in the Dor HaMidbar. That was a supernatural existence. Kal v'chomer in the world of more natural means that we live in. So to say that the army is something that's not necessary is Pashat, it can't be emes. I mean, if Moshe Rabbeinu had to make an army, what are we going to say? We're not on a higher madrega than Moshe Rabbeinu, that's for sure. Okay, so as a result, therefore, even if one believes the army is not a good environment for a Ben Torah or from Jew, and okay, that's a big discussion and a valid discussion that has nothing to do with Hakaras Hatov towards the people who are serving in the army in various capacities. And that's a very big aside, that Hakaras Hatov has to exist. And Judaism is based on Hakaras Hatov. That's why we make brachas before we drink. We make brachas after we go to the bathroom. You know, people make fun. Little kids like to make fun. Oh, bathroom brachas, you know, like kids like to do. But I read an article once. It's probably online, by a frum urologist. Very, very, you know, and he has patients that have problems going to the bathroom. He says, people don't realize until, God forbid, they're ill, what a bracha the normal functioning of the body is. And he says, because of his professional activity, he has a great, deep appreciation of Asher Yotzar. Something to think about. Right? So everything in Judaism is about sensitizing us to gratitude. Such an important meat. I'm sorry, someone had a hand up? Yeah.
I was just going to ask about being Makar Tov. Should a person be Makar Tov for something that mostly had bad results, but some good results also resulted from it?
So there, I think it would largely depend on motivation, meaning if the person who was doing it really intended. Now, they tell a mice, I think, I don't remember it, Clara, just maybe I shouldn't say, but they say something from the Brisker Rav, that the Brisker Rav once gave a mashal about the army helping Am Yisrael, that he says something like this. He said there was a story that a man was walking in the streets, and a man fell into a pit. There was a deep pit. And he broke his leg, and he was in great, great pain, and nobody was around, and you know, he had no way of getting out of the pit. And finally, another man walked by, and the other man put down the ropes, and he lifted him up gently. And the man who fell was so grateful for being saved. And he said, I'm so grateful to you. So the guy said, well, don't be that grateful. I'm the one that dug the pit. So the Brisker Rav, Kedarko, he was very, very sharp. he was great gadol and very, very sharp. He said, that's kind of the situation. Yeah, the army saved us from a whole bunch of tsaras, but the tsaras came because of the averis of the state, and etc. We wouldn't have had the tsaras. Okay, it's hard to know. How can one know what we would have had, what we wouldn't have had? But that was a mashal that the Brisker Rebbe gave, that he held that, what the state did to help us overcome certain problems is that they themselves caused the problems, and then they take us out of the pit. Okay, but that's a Brisker Shita. I'm not necessarily going to go with that mahalach generally. And I think generally Hakaras Hatov is a good thing. In other words, you should err on the side of being Makar Tov rather than not being Makar Tov, because this is a general idea, because once you get into the habit of knocking people, once you get into the habit of disparaging people, the problem is it's going to be transferable, meaning to say, you knock the non-religious, you're going to knock the religious. And that's the nature of these midos, that you generate within you a certain cynicism, a certain beetle. So don't think it's only going to be limited to the people who are not worthy in your judgment. It will leak into other areas. And this is actually a chazal. This is in the Medrash, Tana Devei Eliyahu, which is a medrash comprising the teachings of Eliyahu Hanavi. Tana, in fact, there are two midrashim of that name. There's Tana Devei Eliyahu Rabbah, which is the larger medrash, and then a smaller one called Tana Devei Eliyahu Zuta. By the way, so many people have a minhag, an old Hasidic minhag in particular, that every Motzei Shabbos they would learn a section of Tana Devei Eliyahu. And if you buy a Tana Devei Eliyahu, and you can get ones with translations and the like, you will actually see it's divided into weekly readings, so you finish the whole medrash in the course of a year. So it says in Tana Devei Eliyahu, an interesting thing, it says, he who cheats the guy will eventually cheat the Jew. He who kills the guy will eventually kill the Jew. He who curses the guy will eventually curse the Jew. In other words, morality is not divisible. You can't just say, oh, I will behave this way towards a certain segment of society, because once you develop those attitudes, it's going to be like poison, and it's going to spread in all sorts of areas. It's a very important chazal. That's why it's important, I'm digressing a little bit, it's important in developing an ethical character that you don't be too much of a lamdan, meaning to say, people analyze, and there are in-depth halachas about cheating from a guy, stealing from a guy. Now, in Talmud Torah, you should learn these things. In learning, I want to go through all of the different approaches. But one shouldn't be too much of a lamdan when it comes to basic ethical questions. Meaning, yeah, the halacha says this, and that, and that, but I keep away from that. I don't do that. You see the problem? In other words, because otherwise what happens is your sense of morality atrophies, and then it's going to carry over even to areas where halacha prohibits any type of heter. Okay, so when you get a shaila like, well, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to cheat? Am I allowed to fill out? So sometimes, your answer should just be no, meaning without getting into all of the loopholes that may exist even within the halachic system. Okay, that's the end of the commercial. Okay, what I want you to do, one thing, Yaakov reminded me that I had said that there are two traditionally Jewish Yomim Tovim, so to speak, in the month of Iyar. That's Pesach Sheni and Lag BaOmer. And then I mentioned two Israeli additions, and that's Yom HaZikaron, which is a sad day, and Yom HaAtzmaut. But I forgot perhaps the biggest of all, the 28th of Iyar is Yom Yerushalayim. That's the day at the end of the 6-Day War when we were able to regain the old city, and most importantly, the Harabayas and the ability to go to the Kaisel. In fact, without getting into all the halachas, there are poskim who say that even if one does not recite Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut, one would recite Hallel with the bracha on Yom Yerushalayim. And that's Rav Hershel Schechter's position. And the difference basically is, because Yom HaAtzmaut, if you think about it, even if you're a Zionist and everything, Yom HaAtzmaut started a war. Yom HaAtzmaut was the beginning of the War of Independence. As opposed to Yom Yerushalayim, we actually gained something, and that was the end of the 6 day war. I probably, none of you were, well, you and I were there, but other than the old folks in the room, none of you were born, I assume, by the 6 Day War, but I certainly remember the 6 Day War. I was 6 months old, and I was a little older than that. And many people really believed that this would be the coming of Mashiach. It was such an amazing thing, because you have to know, before the 6 Day War, there was tremendous panic, there was tremendous fear. Many people thought this would be the end of Medinas Yisrael, the end of the Jewish presence in Eretz Yisrael. You had all of these Arab nations who had proclaimed they were going to wipe Israel off the map. Tremendous pachad. Graves were dug ahead of time. Hospitals were empty. They kicked patients home because they said, we're going to have to make room for all of the injured people in war. Tremendous pachad. And then this miraculous war where some Jews did die, but not a large number, actually. And it was mamish seen as a miracle, especially with the regaining of the HaRabayas and the ability to daven at the Kaisel. So what is called the Baal Tshuva movement, or Sameach, Ish Torah, of Meir Schuster, Zichrono Livracha, the idea of people coming back to Judaism, that started in the aftermath of the 6 Day War. There was a great wave of tshuva that was the basis of the Baal Tshuva movement. But the problem in Israel was that there were two different reactions. Meaning, this was a tremendous victory, and a totally unexpected victory. So some people saw this as the Yad Hashem. And they saw this as the Yad Hashem. And therefore they turned to tshuva. There were others that had the attitude of what the Torah describes, Kochi v'yotzim yadi. Hey, we're such a great army that we can beat like all the nations of the world, right? We're the tough guys on the block. And so there was the opposite attitude of the notion of arrogance. Look at how great we are. Look at how powerful we are. There was that reaction in some segments. So then, a few years later, 1973, we had what's called the Yom Kippur War. And the Yom Kippur War, although Baruch Hashem, Israel emerged successful, but there were many casualties. Many casualties. And there were setbacks, and there was tremendous disillusionment, and yish, and sadness. And although none of us are Nevi'im, but I think a number of Gedalim remarked at the time that Hashem was showing us that Kochi v'yotzim yadi isn't it. Because if the pshat is your army is like super duper and they can do everything, then why didn't it work on Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur War and the like? So in a sense, it was a corrective to the Kochi v'yotzim yadi, but it also created a disillusionment on the tshuva part, that the tshuva process got slowed up a little bit because people no longer had this great miracle that they could look at. But okay. All right, but now what I want to talk about today a little bit is I want to talk about something in the Parsha. I have a sentimental attachment to Parshas Acharei Mos. It happens to be my bar mitzvah Parsha, but in that year I had a very easy time of it. It was not a double Parsha, so it was only Acharei Mos without Kedoshim. I guess it was must have been a leap year. Whenever it's not a leap year, of course, so you have fewer weeks, Acharei Mos and Kedoshim are mechubar. Now, Parshas Acharei Mos is largely, not exclusively, devoted to one topic, and that is the Seder of Avoda on Yom Kippur, with the Kohen Gadol going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Right? That's what Acharei Mos is. And in fact, it is the Kriyas HaTorah, at least the first half of the Parsha. It is the Kriyas HaTorah on Yom Kippur morning, Acharei Mos. So let's look at the first part, the second part. Okay. Acharei Mos Shnei B'nei Aaron. Hashem speaks to Moshe after the death of the two sons of Aaron. B'karvasam el Hashem, when they drew near to Hashem and they died. And the commandment is, Al Yavo B'chol Eis El HaKodesh. that Aaron is not permitted to enter the Holy of Holies. Whenever he wants, there has to be a certain avodah. And then it goes through the details of the Yom Kippur service. So the question is this: how is that connected to the death of Aaron's two children? Like, in other words, it says, this was bedafka given acharei mos shnei b'nei Aaron. What's the taliyah? What's the connection with al yavo b'chol eis el hakodesh to acharei mos shnei b'nei Aaron? So to understand this, we have to go back a few weeks. Parsha Shmini, which actually describes the death of Nadav and Avihu. What happened? Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the Mishkan gets dedicated. This is the great dedication of the Mishkan. And it mentions that Nadav and Avihu took a foreign fire to burn incense, and a fire, we'll explain that, and a fire came out from God and consumed them. They died. It's a very unusual death. It consumed them from inside. Their neshama got burnt. Their bodies were intact. Shreifas neshama, v'guf kayam. And the Torah is made. Vayidai Aaron. Aaron was quiet. He accepted it. And Moshe Rabbeinu told Aaron that they were even greater than us. So the question is, what is the chait of Nadav and Avihu? Why did Nadav and Avihu die on the day of Chanukas HaMishkan? Aaron had 4 sons, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, v'Yisamar. On the day of the dedication of the Mishkan, Nadav and Avihu died, leaving only 2 sons of Aaron, Elazar and Yisamar. So Rashi brings a few reasons, and the Midrashim give more reasons. There are many, many, many reasons why Nadav and Avihu died. Reason number 1 is that they drank wine, intoxicating beverage, before they entered the Mishkan, and they died because of the Aveira of Shasui Yayin, drinking wine. And Rashi proves this from the fact that right after Nadav and Avihu died, we have the commandment, do not drink wine when you go to the Mikdash or the base of the Mishkan. Now, l'chayra, here's a problem. L'chayra, you could say, instead of proving the point, doesn't this defeat the point? You know, those of you who are students of the U.S. Constitution are undoubtedly familiar with a concept that says Congress cannot pass an ex post facto law. What is an ex post facto law? A law that punishes a crime for which there was no criminal penalty when it was done. In other words, you can't pass a new law that says anybody, who doesn't, who doesn't show up to davening, will be expelled from yeshiva, let's say. So it makes sense to make that law from now on. We make the law on Sunday, you violate it on Monday, you get kicked out. But if you make a law on Sunday, you can't punish people for violating the law last week. There was no law, right? You can't change the speed limit. You can make the speed limit to 55 and give anybody a ticket who drives higher than that after you change the law. But you can't change the speed limit from 65 to 55 and then give tickets to the people who were driving 65 last week. They were allowed to drive 65 last week. So what are you telling me? You're telling me Nadav and Avihu die because they violated the prohibition of drinking wine that Hashem gave Moshe after Nadav and Avihu died. So Nadav and Avihu were being punished for violating an Aveira, violating a mitzvah that didn't exist at the time. Right? This is what is called an ex post facto law. So the answer has to be that they should have figured it out, meaning to say, as a technical halacha, it was not operative yet. But they should have understood that the kavod of the Mishkan was so significant that you don't get drunk or you don't get intoxicated. In other words, this is something for which they're mechuyev in svara. Now, the notion that svara itself could create obligations, even without a divine command. I'll bring you a very interesting proof from people who were not tzaddikim at all. And this is Sodom. Right? Sodom gets destroyed because they're so evil. What is so evil about Sodom? Now, some people say sodomy, homosexuality, etc. But the Navi Yechezkel identifies very clearly what was evil about Sodom. It's the Navi Yechezkel, because he's comparing the Jewish people to Sodom when he's giving them Musar. And Yechezkel says Sodom was destroyed because of cruelty, lack of rachamim, not taking care of the poor, not caring when other people are suffering. They were destroyed because of callousness and cruelty. So the kasha is, well, wait a second. Non-Jews are only bound by the 7 commandments of Noach. They're not bound by anything else. Where does it say in the 7 mitzvahs of Noach that a non-Jew has to give charity? A Jew, we're given commandments of tzedakah and chesed, which Hashem could punish us for if we don't do. A guy is not mitzvah in tzedakah. If a guy is not mitzvah in tzedakah, or just chesed generally, how could they be destroyed because they failed to do chesed? Chesed is not one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So here, I mentioned this stuff before. I want to correct something. I've always said it in the name of the Drashos Haran. It's not from the Drashos Haran. It is from another, Ran is Rabbeinu Nisam, but this is not Rabbeinu Nisam, the Rishain. This is Rabbeinu Nisam Gaon. Right? If you look at Maseches Brachos, you'll see Rabbi Nisam Gaon has some fragmentary commentaries on the side. Well, if you look at Maseches Brachos, before the first page, before you even get to Daf Beis, you will see around 2 pages called a Hakdama Shel Rabbi Nisam Gaon. Any Maseches Brachos will have this. In fact, Rav Chaim Kanievsky makes that a point. That was part of his learning cycle. When he would start Shas every time, he didn't start from Daf Beis of Brachos. He always read first the Hakdama of Rabbi Nisam Gaon. Very interesting Hakdama. That was part of the cycle. And in the Hakdama of Rabbi Nisam Gaon, he raises the question of why would Sodom be punished for not giving tzedakah if that wasn't a command from Hashem? And his answer is a very powerful answer. His answer is, they should have figured it out as a human being. A human being knows that when people suffer, you're supposed to help them. And therefore, their svara should have been machayev them. And if they did not follow what a normal, decent human being understands intuitively, Hashem is going to hold them to account. That's a very, very amazing idea. Meaning that actually means things could be averos that are very serious, even though there's not a specific divine commandment. So I'm extrapolating from that to Dasan V'Aviram, that even though there wasn't yet a halacha that you're not allowed to drink wine, but they as tzaddikim should have intuited it, and therefore they're held accountable. Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then if it's so pashut, then why did Hashem have to command us? I mean, we could have figured it out. And similarly here, why did Hashem command us not to drink wine in the Azara? It should be pashut.
No. So the case of the wine, maybe your question is not just a strong question, because it could be that this required a certain level of sensitivity, meaning they were high enough that they should have understood it. Maybe we're not high enough, right? So that's why we need the command. Yeah, but tzedakah, you're right. I mean, that's a good, interesting question. If even the Sodomites should have understood, I mean, there you're talking about the lowest people. Even the Sodomites should have understood, then l'chayra kal v'chomer, a regular person, a regular Jew, should understand why was there a need to be given a commandment. That's a very good question. Perhaps Hashem wanted to give us more sechar. By making it a commandment, we get more sechar as a mitzvah v'yaisa. So it's really Hashem's chesed. It's similar to what the Gemara in Makkah says about the negative of blood. remember the Gemara says a svara, or the Mishnah says a svara, that no normal person would want to eat blood anyway. Although some people do, so why does Hashem command don't eat blood? Because He wants to take what we would do naturally and give us reward for fulfilling it. So it could be stuck. It might be a similar type of idea. Okay, yeah.
We also could because of the fact that we don't do mitzvahs just because it's morally the right thing to do. I mean, and there are other Hakaras that say it's also a thing of following the law, right? Because that's the reason why. Because Hashem wants us to do it, so Hashem command us.
Right, I understand. But Rav Nissen Gaon seems to say that we should have understood this is the Ratzon Hashem. Meaning he doesn't just mean natural morality, he means this is the Ratzon Hashem in and of itself. This is a very big chiddush, and not everybody would agree with it. I mean, many would say that until Hashem commands, there's no concept of svara mitzvahs and the like. But this is, again, just remember, this is Rav Nissen Gaon. It's not the Ran, the Rishon Ran. Okay. So that's one Avera. There's only one Avera, that they drank wine. Okay. Avera number 2, they didn't get married. Okay, we'll try to explain this. And therefore they were chayav misa for not getting married. Avera number 3, they used to paskin halacha in the presence of Moshe and Aaron. And there is a principle that you're not supposed to paskin halacha in the presence of your Rebbe. Like even within a certain distance of your Rebbe, without your Rebbe's permission. In fact, technically, that is what smicha is. Smicha today, which is not real smicha, is your Rabbeim are giving you permission to paskin shaylas. Otherwise, you would be mora halacha b'fnei rabbi. So that's number, I'm losing count. I mentioned wine, not getting married, mora halacha b'fnei rabbi. That's the third one. A fourth one, which is related, is that they used to converse among themselves and say, when will Moshe and Aaron die so we can take over? Which is Ka'ein Mara Halacha B'fnei Rabbo. That's number 4. Number 5, they weren't wearing all the proper Big Day Kahuna. If a Kohen does avoda without all the Big Day Kahuna, Chayav Misa, Bidei Shamayim. Number 6, that really they were punished because of the Chet or Egel that Aaron built. And when Aaron built the Egel, he should have lost all 4 of his sons. But Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah took away half of the decree. So only 2 sons died, and not the other 2. And the last Aveira was that they were Chayav Misa all the way back from Matan Torah. It mentions at Matan Torah that they were gazing at the throne of Hashem and the sapphire floor, and they Vayechazu es Elokim. They were gazing at the Shekhinah, Vayechlu Vayishtu, and they were eating and drinking. And this was not covered to Hashem. And really, and this was, it doesn't say who they were, but Chazal say this could have been Nadav and Avihu, and they were actually Chayav Misa B'Shas Matan Torah, but Hashem did not want to take away the simcha of Matan Torah. Of course, a little madna. Hashem doesn't want to mar a happy day by a tragic death, so He kills them on the day of Hakaras HaMishkan. That was also a happy day. So apparently you see that Maimon Har Sinai was more chashuv than even the day of Hakaras HaMishkan. Now, so I've mentioned, how much did I mention? 6, 7? You keeping it? 7? Okay. Here's the problem. The one thing that Chazal give you a whole list of all these things, but the one thing they don't tell you is the Aveira that the Torah itself says they did. The Torah says what they did. They brought a foreign fire. Now, first of all, what does that even mean? It's not so self-explanatory. But it means this. When you bring Ketairos on the inner Mizbeach, you have to take coals from the outer Mizbeach, bring it in, and burn the incense. The fire on the outer Mizbeach is the fire that came down from heaven. Nadav and Avihu decided to bring their own coals. That's called a foreign fire. Instead of taking it from the Mizbeach, they brought their own fire in, and they were chayav misa because they used an eish zara. So the question to think about, which we'll talk about tomorrow, is why do Chazal give us all of these different averos? What about the avera, which is beferish? They brought an eish zara into the heichal, and they didn't use the gechalim, they didn't use the coals, they didn't use the fire that came from the outer mizbeach, which was the fire that Hashem sent down, right? So why are Chazal deviating from what the Chumash itself says? By the way, there's another machlokas, which will connect it to Acharei Mos. Where did they go? Did they bring the Hakaras in the inner mizbeach, which is where Hakaras is normally brought? Or did they actually enter the Kodesh HaKodashim? That's another machlokas. Where did they go? And if they went into the Kodesh HaKodashim, that could be another reason why they'd be chayav misa. But the pashtus of the pasuk is they didn't go into the Kodesh HaKodashim. They went to the regular mizbeach where you're marked your Hakaras, but they used eish zara. So tomorrow we'll go over how do you connect the 7 averos of Chazal with the eish zara that the Chumash itself says. Okay, stay tuned.